So we got hooked up through General McFarland, who said you were one of the most interesting men alive. And as I read through your bio and what you've written and what you've done, that he was certainly a very interesting life you've led thus far.
No, thank you again for having me. And I guess Colonel Sean McFarland at the time, who I worked with in Iraq, was one of, and I know you've worked with him closely. I enjoyed your discussion with him, and as we both know, just a fantastic leader and a fantastic human being. So it was an honor to work with him back then.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So let's get some background on you and growing up. What was that all about?
My childhood, I think, is probably maybe less dramatic or less exciting than some of the other guests you've had. I'd classify it as kind of your typical, middle class, upper middle class, suburban childhood outside Washington, D.C. in Bethesda, Maryland. Oldest of 5 kids. My father was a lawyer. My mom was busy raising the 5 of us.
Was your dad Ivy League?
No, he wasn't.
Okay, because you guys ended up sending every kid went to an Ivy League school in your family? I think
so. I was the first in our family to do that, and then the younger 4 followed in my footsteps. So I think all he has to show for it is just a lot of debt that that he took on and that he shared with us. But no, it was a great childhood. I went to a Catholic elementary school, was taught by nuns, and despite some of the stories you hear, actually, I had a good experience doing that. I learned a lot.
I've had some people on that went to Catholic schools as kids, and they said they were, their Catholic nuns were harsher than their most harsh drill sergeants. So
no,
sounds like you had a better experience.
Yeah. No, you hear the stories about getting your knuckles wrapped with rulers and stuff, but no, we didn't experience any of that. It was a good.
Did education. You inherit any of the? Did you inherit any of the firstborn kind of stereotypical, like, are you a hyper rule follower? Are you aiming to please? Are you kissing up to the boss? Is that your gig?
Maybe a little bit of that. I don't know. My parents may, push back on the rule following, but I think I kind of was like that. I was a hard worker. I was incredibly competitive, from childhood, athletically and academically in the classroom. I'm sure I inherited a little bit of that from my parents, and then some of it was probably just natural. But no, I think that there was an element of that probably going on.
Was there veterans who had served in your family?
Both of my grandfathers served in World War II, and we'll get into this probably in a little bit. But I think thinking back on their experiences did play a role in my motivation to ultimately join the military for sure. Did
they tell you stories when you were growing up or anything?
They did. Their experiences were very different, and their personalities were very different. My mom's father served in the Army Air Corps, and my father's father served in the U.S. Navy, and so he was in the Pacific during the war. And then my mother's...
Is he still alive?
No, they've both passed. They actually both, I think, passed when I was in Iraq, as a matter of fact. Wow. So I lost both of them when I was over there.
I haven't found a sailor, a World War II sailor. I haven't had a World War II sailor on this podcast, and those guys that were fighting in either theater, but just what being in the Navy was like in 1943, waiting to get torpedoed, waiting to get kamikaze attacked. The grit that those guys had was crazy.
It's amazing. It's funny you mentioned that. My father was just visiting my grandma. His wife is now 101, still alive, living on her own in Louisville, Kentucky. Amazing lady. And my father was just there a week or two ago, and he was going through some of my grandfather's diaries from the war. And he took screenshots of a few passages from it. And it's just like you said. And it's not only, I guess, I had always imagined what it might be like to be worried about, a submarine coming after you or some kind of combat. But just the daily life of being out at sea. And that's something we don't even think about. But he talked about how there was this one storm, I think it was actually off the coast, maybe not too far from here, LA or San Diego. And, the waves were so intense that they were knocking out the windows on the bridge of the ship. And he was talking about how there were guys who, spent, 36 hours basically just, vomiting into trash cans and stuff. And and I think sometimes that gets overlooked. We think about the combat element, but just being out there under those conditions, let alone that there might be enemy nearby, and the fact that they didn't know that when this was going to end. It wasn't like nowadays where it's like, okay, you got your 12-month or whatever deployment. That was just, you're out there until we win or lose.
Yep, you're going on deployment until we win, and that's that. And so, when you were growing up, what were you doing? I know you were into sports. So what sports? What were your sports?
It was kind of the you think about the movie Sandlot, or kind of your conventional, childhood back then, kind of the end of that era where kids would just go to the playground with their buddies, and play games. So it was just whatever season you happened to be in. Football, you go play football all day. Baseball, you do baseball. Basketball was kind of, year round to some extent. And we just had our little neighborhood posse of kids. We'd go out there, and it was great. I think it was great development because a lot of my good friends were older, and so you're playing football and you're just getting your butt kicked, by guys that are 4 or 5 years older than you are, a lot bigger and stronger. So then when it comes time to play against kids your age, it doesn't seem so intimidating because you're used to that. So that's what we would do. We'd go out there, and then I was always a hard worker at school. My parents kind of instilled that in me, so I always spent a good amount of time doing homework and things like that.
And so then you end up going to private high school as well, right?
Catholic, Jesuit, all male high school down not too far from the Capitol in Washington D.C. Took the subway down there, as a freshman in high school. Fantastic
daily commute.
Yeah, daily commute. Okay. Yep. Go to baseball practice and then ride home on the subway in your baseball uniform on the way home. Back then, the neighborhood was a little sketchier. It's gotten gentrified since then, but the education's always been fantastic. Really good, history, English. I think that helped kind of foster in me the love of reading. So I have nothing but good things to say about that experience.
And did you have a plan of what you wanted to do? Like, your parents weren't Ivy League, but somehow you decided that you were going to go to the best school you could get into?
That's part of it. I'd like to think it was sort of more sophisticated than that, but in reality, I think it was part of that competition. And there were a handful of kids in the class like me who were always vying to get the top grades, and kind of the goal for that was to get admitted to one of the more competitive schools. And so that's kind of how I ended up applying to those schools.
Was your high school like a feeder school?
No, I wouldn't. It was fantastic education, but it wasn't, like one of these prep schools where, half the class goes to the Ivy League.
You know what that is, Echo Charles? What? A feeder school?
Of course.
I don't think they do it anymore, but like when I was a kid, there was prep schools up in New England where if you went to this prep school, they would just feed right into Ivy League schools. Obviously you had to do well and you couldn't be an idiot, but it was a real thing. It was a real thing.
It's that it's whether it's covert or overt, it's kind of part of the program.
Yeah,
like this is the kind of phase to go into this other thing.
And that's and when I got to Princeton, I saw that because I was like, wait a second, there's a lot of kids here from Groton or Andover, disproportionate number. But no, I sometimes people will suggest that going there was like a gift or the result of kind of being entitled or whatever, and I do kind of push back against that because I think that negates the fact that I was working like a lunatic all through high school to make this happen, and I was spending 3 hours a day studying when other kids were going out and having a good time, and so I had to sacrifice to make it happen.
So were you listening to music? Were you going out on the weekends? None of that stuff.
No, embarrassingly, I didn't. I didn't have the best social life, and there was a lot of between sports and school. I almost gave myself like an academy-like experience. When you hear about West Point or Annapolis,
self-imposed.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have a ton of fun there either. But mine was just self-imposed. Exactly.
How much of that was just being Catholic?
I don't think that played a big part of it. I think it was more just kind of this competitive nature and wanting to do the best I could.